What's up guys, and welcome back to my channel, Patrol in Motion, a place for busy people and dream chasers looking to achieve their goals in a more efficient way. So I'm just going to get straight into it in this video. Today we are going to be talking about interviews. Now, I know that some people, when they hear the word interviews, they just absolutely hate it. Some people love them, but some people absolutely dread them. For me personally, I think my relationship with interviews are quite good. Like, I'm relatively comfortable with them. I feel like I do well in them. And the more I do, I get even better and better each time as well. And that's why now when it comes to interviews, if I do get one, generally I get the role. Thank you, Jesus. But it wasn't always like that. I feel like the more I went to interviews, I picked up things that I noticed that made me give that little bit of an edge each time. I also picked up on things that I think employers are looking for. So if you feel a little bit anxious about interviews, you're looking for a new opportunity or a different shift direction, and you'll most likely need to do an interview, make sure you stick around to the end of this video so I can give you some really good tips to help you ace interviews every single time. Let's get into it. So firstly, in order for you to be able to ace interviews and be able to get offers consistently, I think the important thing to firstly understand is what are employers looking for, right? What is it that they're looking for that they're going to employ me based on? And it really doesn't matter what industry you're in, what sector you're in, the principles of what employers are looking for generally tend to be the same. And they go down to two things. One is being competent. You have the skills, you're able to do the work that is required by the role. And secondly is likability. If I'm in an environment with you, working with you, I want to be there. You're not making my work worse. You're not making my day worse, you just being there because you're bad vibes. Those two things are what I believe employers are looking for in new employees. So it's really key that you keep that in the back of your mind when you're going into an interview. Now, when it comes to competence, that's already been judged. The fact that you've even got an interview, the fact that you've got an interview already says that they believe, based on paper, based on your resume or CV, that you have the competence to be able to do the job. So now it's about being likable and focusing on the things that will make that employer feel like, I would want to be in the same environment as this person. And also, of course, they are able to do the job. So these tips that I'm about to give you will actually focus on the likability aspect of interviews. More employers value that nowadays, and that's where people are really missing out in interviews. They're not coming across likable, unfortunately. Even though you may have the skills and you're qualified, why are you not getting those jobs? Most likely it is the likability aspect. Let me get into it. So the first thing you need to remember when you go for a new role is that you look the part. You walk into the room and you look like what they want. Now, I don't need to say that first impressions are important. You already know this, but they're even more important when you go to an interview because the employer has already prejudged you based on your CV that has landed on their desk. They already have a perception of you, and it may be a negative one. We hope it's a positive one, but it may be a negative one. So then when you go and walk into the room for the first time, that is their first opportunity to either, change that negative impression that they may have of you to a positive one, yay, or it can also reinforce the positive impression that they have of you. What you do not want, major L, right at the beginning of an interview, is to change a positive impression of you to a negative one before you've even talked. Looking the part goes way beyond just coming in and looking, presentable for the interview. That's the baby steps. Obviously, that is very important. It's important that you dress for the culture, function, and the role that you are going for. So for example, I work in tech at the moment, but I work in a corporate firm, but I don't work in the corporate side of it. On a day-to-day basis, people wear jeans, they can be ripped, people wear flip-flops to work kind of thing. So if I turned up to my interview in a suit and tie, even though it's a corporate company for the role and function that I've applied to, it just would have been a bit awkward. So I knew that, and I dressed appropriately. As a rule of thumb, always better to overdress than underdress. If in doubt, just dress up. Do you know what I mean? Otherwise, you'll just come off looking like you just didn't bother. But once again, it's even better to just know how to dress appropriately. I'll give an example, actually. We recently interviewed a new guy that's just joining my team. Lovely lad, I met him as well. But it was a video call because obviously COVID and that, we're not doing face-to-face interviews, and my boss must have come on, and the new guy was in a suit and tie, and my boss, his first impression was like, oh gosh, you made an effort, wasn't it? Like, geez. Because my boss was just like in normal shirt and shorts, you know what I mean? It goes to show that, you know, on first impression, these things do matter. He got the job anyway because he was a likable person, and he ticked a lot of other boxes. But once again, it's good to look the part. Apart from just physically looking the part, also things like body language, tone, your facial expressions, and eye contact are so important. It gives a lot of information about you away. So if you're constantly slouched down in your chair, nothing's coming out your mouth. So physically, you're not saying anything good, you're not saying anything bad to change your impression, but people will automatically prejudge you as, oh, maybe he or she just doesn't want to be here. If you have no eye contact, in as much as you may be a shy person, if it's a customer facing role, for example, it gives the impression that you're not confident, that you're not able to lead and stuff like that. So be aware of these things. Also, tone. Honestly, this one's a big one that people they don't take seriously. They just feel like they can just be talking in one tone throughout an interview and people won't get bored. It's not even just being bored, it just also shows lack of enthusiasm in your voice. Even though everything that you may be saying is enthusiastic and is positive and is great, it shows that you can do the work. If you don't sound great and you just sound a bit boring, employers will also take that into consideration when judging you in that interview. So these are things to always be aware of. Personally, I feel as though what's always worked well for me in interviews is just to smile as you talk. Like, I guess it comes easier to me because I'm a naturally smiley person, but I smile when I talk. I'm so used to doing it now, and I think it's just an inviting way to, you know, invite a conversation and a dialogue with an interviewer. If you're not a big smiler, at the very least, when you meet them, give them a good smile and a firm handshake. Lets them know, once again, inviting that dialogue, and it already sets a great first impression. Another thing to consider when you're going into an interview scenario is to make sure that you come across interested in the role, interested to be there, just interested that, you know, this whole situation isn't a waste of time. I always say interviews are like dating, whether people like it or not, or dating is like interviews, is what it is. I believe that is true to an extent. So first of all, you've got to make sure that it's even worth going to that interview or that interview date, whatever. It's even worth doing that, because if you know it's worth doing that, that shows that you're already interested, and it will come across that you're interested in the interview. I would definitely advise that you research the company extensively, research the role extensively. Make sure before you even enter that interview, you actually want that job. If not, you run the risk of actually coming across uninterested subconsciously. You might not even do it on purpose, but if you're not really wanting something in your heart, you're unlikely to portray that. If you're already there and you're not even that interested in the role, one thing I'll also say is, like, if you're on a date and you're not really interested in said person, make the most out of the situation. You're already there, you did your hair, you did your makeups, you put on a fine dress, and you're there now. There's no point having screwed up face. Even if halfway through the interview situation you're just like, it's cancelled or whatever, make the most out of it. See it as a learning opportunity. I don't understand why people will just automatically just change their mood or ruin the rest of the interview at that point. Because for me, it's like, okay, cool, you don't want to be there, but you're there now. you might as well use your time efficiently. And you know how I feel about time management. Yeah. Another way that you can make sure that the employer knows that you're interested is to ask questions back. Remember that an interview is a two-way process, and it might seem as though the interviewer has more power than you, but you're not powerless, right? You're not powerless. You are able to change your perception of them. Their perception of you by asking them questions, even if they're not too keen on you at a stage in an interview. By asking them questions, showing them that you're keen, showing them that you're interested, it may change the way in which they feel about you. So don't feel as though, oh, this is tanking, there's nothing I can do. Until the doors are closed and you've been sent that, unfortunately, we regret email, there's still an opportunity for you to change the outcome of that scenario. At least try. Another tip I would give in an interview situation is to make sure you don't give away too much information, especially personal information. Make sure you're not oversharing. I feel as though a lot of people do this and it's really just to their detriment. For example, if there's something on your CV, say you've got a career gap in there, you'll be the person to highlight that gap rather than the employer asking you why was that gap there. The way that comes across is that, one, you're insecure about that gap, you are worried about that gap and you feel like you have to justify that gap. That already sets off alarm bells in the employer's mind, like, I should probably be concerned about that gap because you're concerned about that gap. The employer will ask you if they want more information, so don't give them an opportunity to kind of second guess how good you are. Generally, I think oversharing information comes from you as a person not being confident of something that has been asked or whatever, and you're trying to just justify your way out of that situation. I would advise not doing that. Generally, it digs a hole. It really opens up the door for employers to ask more questions about that thing that you're trying to justify, which you don't have the answers for. So just don't overshare. Flirting or inappropriate behaviour. This is the thing. I know it goes on. I know you know someone that be doing that. Just don't do it for several reasons. Firstly, in as much as it may get, especially stuff like flirting or inappropriate behaviour, silly jokes and whatever like that, in as much as it might get you, let's say, past one stage because the person that you're with there is just like, oh, I'm actually quite interested in this. The first stage, especially your first stage interview, is not the only person that you've got to, woo into the room, right? You don't know who you're actually going to be talking to. You don't know their characteristics, their personalities, their life experiences, how you might offend them by doing something borderline awkward or inappropriate. So just don't do that. Even certain jokes, I feel as though it's not always the place to be saying them in interviews. All for cracking a bit of banter, but just be aware that your banter might not be their banter. All of a sudden they're offended and all of a sudden that interview's just X'd. Be careful when, trying to be relatable, because sometimes you just can't relate. They'll just be looking at you like, ha, okay. It's over for you, love. Another good tip for acing interviews is to make sure that you ask questions at the end of the interview. Once again, I kind of touched on this before, but it's kind of a way of them knowing that you're interested. But not only that, where the real gems are in is to be able to ask a question based on something that they've told you in the interview. That one's gold. People generally have a list of questions that they want to come in with, and that's fine, and they ask them, but they're generally the generic, oh, what do you love about this firm? What makes you stay? What's the hardest thing about this role? All of that jazz. Listen, they've heard that before. You're not gonna get brownie points for that. What you will get brownie points for, however, is if they've said something to you and then you come back with like a rebuttal, not really a rebuttal, but a following question based on what they've said. That shows that, one, you listen, two, you're genuinely interested, and three, that you have something that you can relate with. All of these things contribute towards you being likable. It's very good to come prepared, come with your questions, but in that interview, make sure you're listening to what the employer's saying. It is a two-way process. Don't let it just flow one way. If it's flowing one way, that interview is not a good interview. So lastly then, just some extra tips on how you can perhaps stand out in an interview, or just always just be prepared in an interview. It's really, really good that you kind of know who is interviewing you and knowing a little bit of their background before you go into the interview. So if you're talking to an agent, for example, ask them, oh cool, so who will be taking this interview? What's their role? What's their function? Can you tell me a little bit about them? Try to get a little bit of information about them so you're not going in blind. There might be something that you find, I don't know, on the internet about them. They like football, and then you can drop a quick football something. It really makes you kind of likable to them, and it's a way that you can relate to them as well. I would advise, doing a quick LinkedIn search, trying to see their background, trying to see what kind of functions they've been in, their progression and all of that. It kind of gives you a good impression of what kind of person they are, maybe not their characteristics, but in terms of their career path as well. Remember to also bring a printed copy of your CV, just in case. You never know, perhaps one other person in the room doesn't have a printed out CV. You offering a printed out CV shows that you're organized, you're ahead of the game. It's a good sign. There is no disadvantage of doing that. Also, you might forget something on your CV, perhaps. I mean, we hope you don't, because that's not a great sign. But you might forget something on your CV and you need to refer to something, so you can also always bring that out as well if need be. Don't advise it, but it's better than you having a blank mind whatsoever. So yeah, guys, these are kind of my tips on how you can ace an interview every time. Once again, they're focused on how you could be likable. Of course, I'm not saying, blag your way or just like your way or, humor your way. Definitely do not humor your way into a job, because you need to be able to do the job too. I'm assuming that you got that down, but also being likable is a great step in getting employers to want to have you on board, and also for you to be able to secure that role. On the last note as well, being likable also allows you to have more leverage in the negotiation period. The more likable you are, the more they don't want to have to go through this process again to go and find someone equally as likable as you. So you are able to push those limits a little bit more salary wise the more that they like you. Alright guys, that's it for this week's video. I hope you found it helpful. Are any of you kind of going through interviews at the moment? How's it going for you? Do you feel like some of these tips are where you're perhaps failing in some of your interviews? Drop a comment down below and make sure that you like and share this video so that someone else that might be going through an interview right now can get some top tips and ace that interview with the help of you and me. Guys, I know interviews can be daunting, but be encouraged that the more that you do them, the better you'll get, the more confident you'll get, and sooner or later, by God's grace, we get to the place where we're doing the interviews and not being interviewed. So that's definitely gonna happen. I'll see you in my next video, guys, and take care.